When it comes to abusive relationships, the first line of conversation we have oftentimes with the victim is that why they don't leave the situation. Oftentimes, it's very easy to point fingers and shift the responsibility onto the victim. The simple answer would be that it is not that easy. Oftentimes, they don't have the resources to do so. Abusive environments are oftentimes very layered. We need to scale back and dissect in terms of what happens in a relationship that leads that person to end up where they did, and what happens in terms of post abusive relationship, in terms of recovery or in terms of maladaptive behavior. I think we are all familiar with this series called The Stranger Things, right? Let's take Ellen Henry, for example. I think they are both classic examples of how the pipeline looks in terms of post abusive relationship. Before that, let's understand few things about abusive relationships. Let's clear out certain misconceptions right off the bat so that we do not find these things confusing down the line. Let's talk about this paper written by Donald Dutton and Susan Painter. They talk about how there's a trauma bond that is formed in an abusive relationship where there is two things. One is power imbalance and another is intermittent abuse. Rather than weakening the attachment, the cycles between fear and relief actually intensifies the bond between the abuser and the victim, making the victim feel a strong attachment towards the abuser even though they recognize the harm in their relationship. The bond that develops in such a situation is not formed because of confusion, but because intermittent reinforcement under a threat creates a very durable attachment that is resistant to change. A lot of clinicians would attest to this when I say the victims form a really strong attachment to their abusers, to the point even when they leave the abusive situations, they still think about them. So the problem isn't that they can't identify that the situation that they are in is harmful. So it begs the question, what is then? What is causing this? This is where Dunton and Painter talk about the term called trauma bond. It's the abuser's ability to make the victim create an attachment towards them despite the horrifying situation that they are creating. Dunton and Painter talk about three major strategies that an abuser would use in terms of making the victim feel a trauma bond towards them. So, those three are power imbalance, intermittent abuse, periods of harm, followed by relief. Now, let's just cut back to the Hawkins lab. This is laboratory conditions of what I just mentioned. So, Dr. Brenner assumes the role of Papa. It is personal and it holds power over the children in terms of social hierarchy. Now, in terms of intermittent abuse, Dr. Brenner has a clear schedule that he calls lessons, which usually involve punishment and performance, which is either preceded or followed by playtime. See, if an environment was purely torture, a person would grow resentful towards it. But while experiencing intermittent abuse, the environment which oscillates between positive and negative experiences, this has an arousal effect on the victim, which is oftentimes very addictive. There has been research time and time again that talks about intermittent reinforcements. Researchers show that this is one of the strongest methods to train behavior. Why? Because it is resistant to extinction, harder to unlearn, stronger emotional learning. And this is the most interesting part of it because the behavior lasts well after the reinforcements have vanished. So it is natural when a person is trained in this specific method, it's harder for them to break away from their abusers. Brenner clearly, clearly in terms of black and white, establishes what he is expecting the children of and what he does not want from the children. If they perform what he wants, he rewards them with affection or playtime. If they fail, they are oftentimes subjected to painful stimuli. He is not only teaching them to form an attachment with him, but he's also teaching the fact that love is not free. And oftentimes, these type of beliefs stick with the person throughout their lifetime. You can see them exhibiting the same belief even after they have left the abusive relationship. Because this abusive relationship has essentially taught them that you do not deserve love intrinsically, unconditionally. So now Vecna and L have been raised in the same kind of environment and have similar outlook on life. But Elle gets exposed to the other kids and Mike. You see them teach Elle about the basics of emotional and social interaction. Oftentimes, people around us work as social mirrors through which we do reality checking. As social animals, we co construct reality, that we don't purely rely on our own senses to construct what is real. Now, Henry gets blasted into the upside down. Oftentimes, abuses systematically cut down friends, family, and social resources to the victim to have more power over them. It is easier for the abuser to control the narrative that way because the victim might not have the social mirrors to check their perspective off of. Unintentionally, the series creates a similar circumstances for Henry. Henry gets blasted into the upside down and is isolated with a mind flare for years without any social contact. This would potentially increase the bond he has with the mind flare and have a sort of identity fusion effect on Henry. Which brings me to the next thing, which is identity coercion or identity destabilization. Abusers oftentimes try to break the identity of the victim. When it's successfully done, it is easier for the abuser to create an enmeshment with the victim. Enmeshment is when the psychological boundaries are re-blurred and the victim becomes over identified with the abuser to the point that they might feel anxious or guilty for having to exercise their own individualism. Now, Elle throughout the season develops multiple identities. She is given the opportunity to play the role of a friend, a romantic interest, a sort of a daughter figure to Hopper. She learns to make secure attachments to the point that in the season finale, she is able to walk away from her social circle. But Henry only gets to play the host of Mind Flayer. That's exactly why, when Will witnesses what set this all off in Henry's mind, that he was just a well intentioned child who was there at the wrong place at the wrong time. For the first time in the series, we get to witness Henry as something other than a dehumanized villain. Will tries to reason with Henry. We see Henry battle with it for a moment and is able to recognize the truth in Will's words. But the question looms over him. If not a host for the Mind Flayer, what am I? What was all of this for? Who am I if not useful? If I'm not useful, I don't deserve belongingness. This is exactly why Henry goes back to his safety. Because freedom means uncertainty, but going back means something he's used to, something he can navigate, which is an abusive relationship. That gives him a sense of illusion of control. So when your brain is oftentimes handed a choice, freedom but uncertainty versus abuse but familiarity, your brain normalizes the abuse and takes the familiarity. And this secures Henry's end. What ultimately separates Elle and Henry isn't power, intelligence, or even trauma. It's the exposure of alternatives. Eleven survives uncertainty because she's learned through relationships, conflict, and care that she is more than just the environment that shaped her. She has multiple mirrors that reflect multiple different versions of herself back to her. A friend, a daughter, an outsider, a protector, and this multiplicity allows her to form her own autonomy. So when safety disappears, she does not collapse because safety was never the source of her identity. She was. Henry, on the other hand, was never given such mirrors. He was only given containment. His world was reduced to function and ability. And without the social reference points, identity couldn't diversify. The abusive relationship is the only coherent structure that his nervous system could recognize. So when he faced freedom, what should have felt like liberation felt like annihilation. Uncertainty was intolerable. Familiar abuse was survivable. This is oftentimes why people don't leave harm when escape is offered. The brain doesn't choose what's good, it chooses familiarity. Healing then becomes not about strength or morality, it becomes about if they are given the space to experience themselves more than just survival. Because when identity is broader than pain, freedom does not feel scary. It remains a possibility. But when pain is the only structure that they have known, freedom feels like falling into nothingness. And the difference between having an identity and being fused to your environment is is what ultimately decides who can step away and who cannot. So if you are in an abusive relationship, take this as a sign. Believe me when I say this, you are stronger than what you give yourself credit for. If you can go through all of that and still keep going, you have the strength to reinvent yourself. But the first step is going to be from you. Start securing your financial independence. Ask for help. Go to therapy. Because if there is anything worth fighting for, that is you. Ask for help. Go to therapy. Because if there is anything worth fighting for, that is you. And I'm going to hold your hand when I am saying this. You deserve love, unconditional love. Love that happens not because of your utility, but from the eyes that sees your soul and recognizes the beauty in it. Until next time, take care.